For introduction. There are no bills for introduction. The House then comes to questions for oral answer, and the first question stands in the name of Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, does he stand by his statement that, quote, we are firmly focused on keeping the government's overall debt as low as possible?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, yes, and the government believes it has made reasonable judgments about the appropriate use of debt. Through the recession, we have borrowed extensively to support our public services and our income transfers to New Zealand families and households, as well as borrowing extensively to fund the rebuild of Canterbury. We made clear at the time of those large commitments that over time we would expect to stop borrowing more money and eventually reduce our debt. So we have had quite high levels of debt the last couple of years, high levels of government borrowing, but that is rapidly tailing off.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the government's goal is to keep overall debt as low as possible, why is it planning to sell high-returning energy assets for about $6 billion, but then borrow a similar amount to build motorways with low or negative returns which haven't passed the Treasury's business case guidelines?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's no suggestion of the government borrowing billions of dollars for motorways. The motorway investment is largely funded from, or all funded actually, from the dedicated road user charges and excise tax that goes into the road user fund.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Minister aware of the 2011 briefing to the incoming Minister of Transport, which warns that there is a $5 billion plus hole in the government transport budget over the next 2 decades, caused by its uneconomic motorway projects, which is similar to the amount it hopes to raise from asset sales?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe the briefing does say that. In fact, it's probably, I think, a bit of a time-honoured ritual, actually, that every incoming Minister of Transport gets told there's not enough money. Every incoming Minister of Transport, regardless of party, tells the transport agencies to go and do a better job, and almost inevitably they do. And without significant increases in funding, are managing a large investment in roads, and the main reason for that is because most people drive cars and need good roads to drive on.
The Honourable David Parker. Point of order, Dr. Russel Norman.
Speaker, in light of the Minister's answer, I seek to table the briefing to the incoming Minister, which says that paragraph 75, there's a $5 billion hole.
Order, these documents are readily available. We're not going to have quotes from it for that purpose. Honourable David Parker.
Did the Minister say, and I quote, currently the government debt is still rising rapidly because we're running deficits by 2014 and 15, we would hope that we are able to stop the increase in government debt? And if he did say that, will he be stopping the plans by the New Zealand Transport Authority to borrow money?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, yes, I'm pretty sure I did say that. It sounds sensible to me. And on the second issue, the Minister of Finance has to sign off any borrowing by NZTA, and so yes, we could stop it.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If debt is such an important issue for this government, why hasn't it reassessed the need for these motorway projects at a time of rising petrol prices and falling traffic volumes, rather than go ahead and give itself the power to put billions of dollars on the public credit card to fund projects that have never been put through Treasury's guidelines?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government has, both the previous government and this government, has done a number of assessments about the need for roads. I know the member disagrees with some of the highway projects and favours pretty expensive rail projects that need massive public subsidies to make them work. We stand by our judgment. We believe it will help the economy to grow and provide better services for the public.
Maggie Barry.
Supplementary to the Minister of Finance. Has the government succeeded in controlling the build-up of debt?
The Honourable Bill English. The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, the answer to that, of course, is yes. When we came into government in 2008, the briefings to the incoming government showed that under the previous government settings, net government debt would reach 60% of GDP by 2026. As a result of the decisions this government has taken, we would expect net government debt by 2026 to be around 0% of GDP, not 60% of GDP.
Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Minister aware that most of the government motorway projects have very poor returns? According to the government numbers, for example, the Warkworth to Wellsford project would cost $1 billion to produce just $600 million in benefits. That is a net loss. Well, the budget shows that the energy assets have very good returns, well above the cost of government borrowing.
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with the member's numbers, but I would point out to him that it's a bit rich for the opposition parties to campaign on dire poverty in Northland and lack of economic opportunities, and then campaign against the most vital piece of infrastructure they need to develop their economy.
Maggie Barry.
Supplementary question to the Minister of Finance. Has he seen any reports about policies that would increase the government's debt?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, there are so many of these reports it's hard to keep up with them. But if I can just list a few: 13 months of paid parental leave at 100% of the average male wage, universal student allowances for full-time tertiary students, and to give the in-work tax credit to beneficiaries, as well as the dole for all unemployment students over the summer holidays. Just this list of promises made by opposition parties, particularly the Green Party, would cost an $11 billion a year.
Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is the logic in selling assets that produce healthy returns to the government in the name of reducing debt, and then turning around and increasing government debt by about the same amount to build uneconomic motorways?
The Honourable Bill English.
Yeah, well, Mr. Speaker, most of those statements are wrong. As the government has said, with respect to debt, the sale of assets will mean we can avoid borrowing another $5 to $7 billion in difficult global financial markets. Alongside that, the government is overseeing pretty impressive fiscal restraint to make sure that we don't borrow any more than we need to provide the public services that we are required to.
Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the real reason that the government is planning to sell $6 billion worth of profitable strategic energy assets to avoid debt, and then it's borrowing about the same amount to build motorways that don't have an economic business case, because these policies aren't driven by economics, they are driven by an outdated ideology from this government and for purely political reasons?
The Honourable Bill English.
No, Mr. Speaker. If there's any outdated ideology, it is the ideology that says we should spend as much as we like and borrow it all, and an ideology that is totally opposed to the private sector and economic development as articulated by the Green Party.
Question number 2, John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance.